On 30th of June 2025, while the world was cut off over the recent escalations between the State of Israel and Iran, another conflict was fiercely raging in Nigeria. In early hours of the day, gunmen believed to be Fulani headsmen stormed the village of Yelwata in Benue State, Nigeria, opening fire indiscriminately on residents and setting homes ablaze. By the end of the attacks, about 100 to 200 lives were taken, according to various estimates, and about 3,000 persons internally displaced. And this attack is not an isolated event. Nigeria all quite has been witnessing attacks of this magnitude, or worse, as though what has come to be regarded as the farmer-herder conflict. Since the past decade, this crisis has taken about 10,000 lives. For more context, the Rohingya crisis, a far more mainstream story, has taken just under 7,000 lives. It tells you the scope of the carnage, especially for a country with other security threats like Boko Haram, ISWAP, and other militant groups, stretching the very limits of this security architecture. See, since 2011, Nigeria has witnessed a spike of bloody clashes between predominantly Fulani herders and various indigenous farming communities across the country. And by far, it's one of the biggest security threats, not just for the people, but the entire unity of the country. And largely because this isn't just perceived as a random clashes between farmers and herders as could be found in other parts of the world, but because the dynamics, the nature, the tactics, and the trend speak of an even more sinister agenda, with collaborators cutting across players and even influential political figures. This is the story of Nigeria's hidden war. We'll get to the crux of this story by looking at the region. Nigeria is a multi-ethnic diverse country with over 250 ethnic groups, among which are the prominent Hausa Fulani, Igbo, and Yoruba groups. The use of Hausa Fulani is intentional, as both are actually two distinct groups, but have developed a shared history and is relevant to our story. You see, unlike major ethnic groups, the Fulani are normally pastoralists, and as such, always in search of new lands for forage for their cattle. This expedition often pits them against local farmers, which often ends in bloody exchanges. Many have treated this crisis overwhelmingly to climate change, and this is not just local within Nigeria, or across the West African Sahel region, where the group can be found. This has added to the profiling of the group in various parts of Africa, but many of which ignore the roots and factors fueling this conflict. You see, the Fulani has long and quite controversial history in the region. Originally believed to have migrated from the Senegal River Valley of West Africa in the Futato region. But from the 14th century, the group began to migrate eastwards and southwards to other parts of West Africa, largely driven by the search for greener pasture for their livestock. Predominantly Muslim, over the years, they have built various relationships with their host communities, assimilating to their cultures and even going as far as establishing their own empires and caliphates, like the Imamate of Futa Jalon, the Messina Empire, and the Sokoto Caliphate of the 19th century, establishing themselves in their various host communities. You see, being nomadic, the Fulanese established various transhumanist routes with locals, a route which runs through the Sahel down to the Middle Belt and regions of Nigeria, in an arrangement with locals across the region. But over the years, with rapid population explosion, much of those transhumanist routes became eroded with local farms, thus setting the stage for violent clashes. But this doesn't explain a lot of the crisis, just as the climate change theory, especially propagated by Western media, doesn't. So why is this tension taking a bloody turn like it's witnessed today? You see, the farmer-herder crisis in Nigeria is not unconnected from the border security crisis in the Sahel region. From 1980s to 1990s, with the beginning of a global jihadist movement, mainly championed by Salafist scholars, many Islamic scholars who went to Saudi Arabia at the time for Islamic education came back with radical Salafist ideas, which advocated for a more stricter application of Islam, which largely opposed the predominant traditional approach to Islam entrenched in the region. And concerning the failures of government in the region, subscribing to this idea by the disenfranchised group wasn't a surprise. A notable group that has recently embraced this version of Islam and has become synonymous with it are the Fulanis, and understandably, for a reason. You remember the transhumanist route that existed among communities prior to colonial times? Right, post-independence governments in the region invested little to nothing as regards to pastoralist agriculture, which happens to be the main staple by the Fulanis. Coupled with the conversion of lands previously available for grazing to cultivate farms, it explains why the Fulani groups could easily be prone to adopting Salafist ideals, which in their view would establish an equitable society based on the Sharia. With this background already in place, the spark only came with two major events in the 2010s that saw the whole crisis take a new dimension. Now this is important, as data shows clashes between herders and farmers were scanty and had fewer casualties. But after 2011, the figures had risen above the roof, a trend that still continues to rise. First was the 2011 general elections in Nigeria. President Goodluck Jonathan, a southern Christian, winning against Muhammad Buhari, a northern Fulani Muslim. The result of the elections sparked widespread violence across the north, especially in hotspots like Kano, Kaduna, Katsina, Bauchi, Plateau states. This crisis was marked by attacks on southerners and other Christian minorities in parts of the north. In retaliation, fought back against these attacks by Hausa Fulani Muslims. Among the casualties were Fulani herders, many of whom were barred by many Christian minority communities, especially in southern Kaduna, from grazing their fields, forcing many of these Fulanis to move southwards. Also worthy of note was the arming of many of these Fulani herders by politicians. During this crisis, others formed militias to protect their interests. Already exposed to Salafist ideas, many of the Fulani herders in fact saw a religious reason to carry out these attacks on supposed infidels. However, religion wasn't the only rationale pushing this, as we would see. And things didn't help that these events were happening simultaneously with the crisis in Libya that resulted in the collapse of the Gaddafi regime and the stabilization of the Sahel region. With the stabilizing factor gone in much of the Sahel, the power vacuum was filled with groups with extremist ideas. First was the Tuareg militia, who were armed and fought for Gaddafi, returned to Mali and set off the ISWAP revolt. Then the inclusion of other jihadist groups like Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wa al-Muslimin, Jenin for short, the Islamic State Sahel province, Ansar Dine, Ansar Islam, mostly around Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Boko Haram in Nigeria. The region became a highway for arms proliferation. But the case of Mali and Burkina Faso is going to be important to our story. You see, following the civil war that broke out in Mali by 2012, as a result of the Tuareg ISWAP revolt, other jihadist groups hijacked the revolt, settling the secular Tuaregs and establishing Sharia. This prompted the Malian government to invite French forces, and jointly they successfully pushed the jihadists from the cities into rural regions mostly inhabited by Fulanis, terrorizing and radicalizing men. By 2015, this guy, Amadou Kofa, formed a Fulani jihadist group, Katiba Messina, in Mali, and it soon spread into other parts of Niger and Burkina Faso over what he felt was the marginalization of the Fulani people by other groups. Call to his message was, "The state has failed you. Take what was denied from you. The land belongs to Allah's people." This radical ideology would come to shape much of Fulani's relationship with other groups in the region. In response, the governments in Mali and Burkina Faso began a brutal crackdown on Fulanis, sometimes raising communities to the ground. These indiscriminate killings of Fulanis and their livestock forced a lot of them to migrate south to Nigeria. And speaking of migration, we've noticed that about 98% of our viewers aren't subscribed to the channel. Please do subscribe, like, and click the notification button as it keeps us making this kind of videos. Now back to the video. But why Nigeria? See, Nigeria, though having lower percentage of Fulanis in the Sahel, at 7%, in fact accounts for the highest number in the region at 16 million. And not just numbers, the Fulanis account for a significant number of the country's political class. For proper context, 8 of Nigeria's 15 heads of states were Fulani or had Fulani roots. So unlike any other parts of the region, Nigeria was where they had more control and influence on government. And little wonder why much of the migration of Fulanis into the country was left unchecked. Not only Fulani refugees ran to Nigeria, many of the dislodged militants and jihadist fighters came along, many importing their vices to the fragile nation. Many went to the forest, this time not to graze, but to engage in banditry, kidnapping, and terror activities. But the most sinister situation this brought about was a massive spike in herder attacks across the middle belt and parts of southern Nigeria. Simultaneously with the crisis in Mali, the emergence of Muhammad Buhari, a Fulani, as the elected president of Nigeria in 2015, saw a new trend to this crisis. Emboldened by Fulani privilege, many Fulani herders grew assertive, sometimes sacking and displacing communities. Take for instance, this is Dakum, now renamed Mayanga by the Fulanis in 2014, and how it looks in 2025. And this is just one of the numerous communities displaced and resettled by Fulanis since this crisis began, driving narrative of not just climate change, but a systematic land-grabbing agenda.
We will try more to cultivate that culture in our people, while at the same time bringing the Fulanis in one fold and try to arrest their traditional practice of moving from one. The Fulani man is a global or an African person. He moves from the Gambia, from Senegal, and his nationality is just a Fulani man. And as a person, I may have my relations in the Cameroon, but they are also Fulani men. I have relations because from the maternal side, I'm a Fulani. In most cases, the crises are precipitated by those outside Nigeria. When there is a reprisal, it is not the Fulani man within Nigeria that causes it. It is that culture of getting revenge, which is embedded in the tradition of the Fulani man, that attracts reprisal from all over the. It is going to be a colony, and a colony does not require a fence.
You will
It is not
understand
going
the
to be a
reason.
prison.
You will understand the reason why people are concerned because of all the security issues that have been happening over time. So if that
These forests are there anyway. If you don't occupy them and create a colony out of them, they create places for the criminals. And today, that's why you have the Sambisa forest, because it is not being utilized.
But the fact that political office holders often make comments like this goes a long way to show the level of government complacency. The government of Muhammad Buhari made active attempts to establish Fulani colonies across the country and what he called rural colonies, while playing ignorant to the countless thorough attacks by Fulani supremacists, even while he high-handedly handled other agitation movements like the Shiites, the ISWAP, and the Oduduwa Nation agitators. No major military operations were launched to curb this menace. In fact, various reports and footage showed government officials actively enabling and arming these Fulani herdsmen and bandits across the country. In fact, we know these attacks, interestingly, were frequent against Christians and other minorities in the north and the middle belt. But one shade to this crisis that show that it transcends religious sentiments, but more ethnic, is the recent constant clashes between Hausa, who predominantly are Muslims, mainly farmers, and Fulani herders. You see, the Hausas, who are the predominant group in northern Nigeria, control much of the land, a setup it has maintained even before and after Fulani migration and caliphate. Even though the Sokoto Jihad replaced the Hausa kings for Fulani emirs, most of the land remained firmly with the Hausas. Although some Fulani became stationary and owned lands, a lot still retained the nomadic culture. But the dismissal of Fulanis in 2011 in parts of northern Nigeria, in Mali in 2015, coupled with the increasing demand for land for agriculture in a region already feeling the impact of climate change, clashes between these groups became frequent. And one of the major actors, these imported radicalized Fulanis from the Sahel, while leaving the doors open for more Fulanis in a region already grappling with limited resources. Well, Nigeria's northern elites, mostly Fulanis, seem to feel more affinity to their fellow tribesmen across the border than fellow Nigerians. The goal is simple: result as much as many displaced Fulanis in any part of the country as possible, even when it means sabotaging the interest of national unity. So beyond the reports of climate change, the story is more of an ethnic and ideological struggle enabled by nepotistic politics, which revolves around lands. But before you ask why Nigeria aren't adopting right-wing practices, first ask if the leadership of the country is ready to address this crisis for what it is: an ethnic and ideological struggle for lands by some persons in one group that thinks they are entitled to other people's lands.